The California coast, over 1,200 miles of natural beauty. It is an environment of impressive diversity, from sandy beaches to jagged seaside cliffs. It is also an environment filled with life. California's coastal waters are a haven for one of the richest assemblages of marine life on Earth. And the most prominent feature of this California marine wilderness is its forests of giant kelp. Rising from the rocky bottom off California is an amber-colored seaweed known as giant kelp. It grows skyward and forms a golden-hued canopy. Forests, or beds of giant kelp, are the foundation of an ecosystem that is home to myriad forms of wildlife. Within these forests, a struggle unfolds. Food is a priority. Some animals hunt, others lie in wait. At times, hunters become the hunted. The moray eel has poor eyesight, but its sense of smell is extraordinary. It easily detects this octopus. The moray's attack is swift. This time, the moray will have to settle for a tasty morsel. Fortunately for the octopus, it will survive, and its lost arm will regenerate. Nudibranchs, or shellless snails, are common within kelp forests. These animals flaunt their presence in the face of predators. Their bright coloration serves as a warning that they are foul-tasting. But not all animals heed this warning. The nabanax, a relative of the nudibranch, is carnivorous and often feeds on nudibranchs. The vast array of creatures found within kelp forests is truly staggering. Anyone who has dived among the amber giants can attest to the variety of life found there. Giant kelp, called Macrocystis pyrifera by scientists, is appropriately named. This highly evolved brown alga is the world's largest marine plant, reaching lengths of over 200 feet. Giant kelp lacks a root system. Instead, it has a holdfast. This mass of intertwining, branching strands called haptera anchors each plant firmly to the rocky substrate. Reproductive blades, or sporophylls, are located directly above the holdfast. Sporophylls produce trillions of microscopic spores annually, only a few of which will develop into adult plants. The fronds grow from the apex of the holdfast and resemble vines. They are composed of long stipes and leaf-like blades. Gas-filled bladders keep the plant afloat, enabling it to form canopies. When sunlight is ample, ocean temperatures cool, and nutrients plentiful, fronds can grow at a rate of up to 2 feet per day. Giant kelp plants are perennial, living for several years, but individual fronds only survive for about 6 months. So it's natural for giant kelp to produce drift, pieces of fronds that break away. Many animals depend on this drift for food, including the abalone, a single-shelled mollusk that clings tenaciously to rocky reefs using its large muscular foot. Some sea anemones are omnivores, feeding on both plants and animals. This anemone is nibbling on a piece of drift kelp, but its unusual shape suggests its main course was a starfish. Several species of fishes feed directly on giant kelp. Others use the kelp forest as a refuge. The Garibaldi makes its nest in the kelp forests. In preparation for egg laying, the male Garibaldi cultivates a nest of red algae. He also protects the nest from unwanted scavengers, like this purple sea urchin. After being attracted to the nest by the male, the female Garibaldi lays thousands of eggs. As is nature's way, only a few of these eggs will develop into adult Garibaldi. The male fertilizes the eggs by releasing sperm as he wiggles and turns above the nest. The male then protects the eggs until they hatch. Nearly 800 species of animals have been identified within forests of giant kelp. The holdfast alone, with its maze of intertwining strands, provides a home for more than 200 species of marine creatures. Gray whales sometimes visit the kelp forest while migrating between their summer feeding grounds in the Bering Sea and their winter calving grounds off Baja California, Mexico. Gray whales can achieve lengths of 50 feet and weigh as much as 35 tons. The kelp forest is not only a wilderness habitat, but also an important resource for man. Kelco, a division of MERCK and Company Incorporated, harvests and processes giant kelp to obtain algin, a natural substance contained in the cell walls of the plant. Kelco's harvesting vessels look and function like most large ships. Once at their destination, however, they undergo a transformation. The main engines are secured, and a bow propeller pushes the vessel, stern first, through the water. Reciprocating blades, similar to those used to harvest wheat, cut the kelp 4 feet beneath the surface. Loose fronds are then gathered by vertical rollers. The fronds then begin their journey up the conveyor system and into the large bin that accounts for most of the vessel's length. Depending on the density of the kelp bed, up to 600 tons of kelp can be gathered by this vessel in 8 hours. Harvesting of kelp within California's coastal waters is regulated by the California Department of Fish and Game. Kelp harvesting wasn't always so efficient. In the early days, workers gathered kelp using long poles. Once drawn alongside, the kelp was cut and pulled aboard. 6 men working all day could collect 50 tons. Kelco's first mechanical harvester was built in 1937. Kelco was founded in 1929. Initially, the company produced a dried form of kelp for livestock feed. It also extracted algin for use in a compound to seal tin cans. Through continued research, the company has developed many additional applications for algin. Operations have since expanded to Scotland, where other species of seaweed are processed. At Kelco's San Diego plant, the freshly harvested kelp is unloaded with a large crane that takes more than 3 tons of kelp with each grab. The basic algin extraction process was identified in the late 1800s. Kelco scientists and engineers improved this process and developed custom-designed processing equipment. The kelp is chopped, cooked, and filtered. The algin is then recovered, dried, milled, and tested before being packaged for shipment. The final algin products are free-flowing granular or fibrous powders. Algin smooths, thickens, and forms gels in literally hundreds of products. Salad dressings are emulsified and stabilized with algin. In ice cream, algin improves texture. In toppings, algin improves flow characteristics. Important uses are also found in cosmetic and pharmaceutical products. It is even used in textile printing paste to create well-defined colors. The giant kelp resource is monitored by Kelco marine biologists using aerial surveys. These surveys determine the abundance and condition of the kelp. Harvesting vessels are directed to the more mature canopies to maximize their use before they are lost to natural causes. Kelco marine biologists also conduct underwater surveys to check the general health of the kelp forests, which are especially well developed off the coast of California from San Diego to Santa Cruz. Giant kelp is suitable for mechanical harvesting because it grows in relatively deep water, ranging from 20 to over 100 feet. This allows for the use of large harvesting vessels. The surface canopies can be harvested several times a year without disturbing the submerged parts of the plant where reproduction occurs. Photosynthesis, growth, and buoyancy are distributed along the entire length of the plant, and therefore are not eliminated when canopies are removed. The harvested canopies are regenerated by younger fronds that are growing beneath the surface. Throughout the natural cycle of a kelp plant, fronds continually mature, then die and break away. This process is called sloughing. Other marine plants off California also slough and produce excess material that breaks away. At high tide, this drift material is cast well up on the beach. Beaches are relatively clean during the spring and early summer. Beach litter tends to increase during the fall. High winds and heavy seas associated with winter storms do unbelievable damage to seaweed beds. Surface canopies of giant kelp practically disappear during severe winters. The surging water tears plants apart or uproots them entirely. A visit to the beach following a storm frequently reveals huge piles of decaying seaweed. Another cause of forest loss is an overabundance of sea urchins, which have an insatiable appetite for kelp. Increased urchin populations are often attributed to the lack of natural predators. Wolf eels feed on urchins, but they are not abundant enough to keep urchins in check. Sheephead also eat urchins, but they have been reduced by fishing, and their influence on urchin populations is now minimal. One of the most important sea urchin predators, the southern sea otter, was nearly hunted to extinction in the 1800s. Before the onslaught of fur hunters, the sea otter lived along much of the California coast. Sea otters would dive among the kelp day and night to satisfy their voracious appetites. Today, the southern sea otter remains an endangered species that lives primarily in central California. Recently, a new sea urchin predator arrived on the scene: man. Sushi lovers consider urchin reproductive organs, or roe, a prized delicacy. Because of the popularity of roe in Japan, demand for urchins has skyrocketed. Urchin divers are very efficient, but they only harvest healthy red sea urchins. This leaves the smaller purple sea urchins to multiply. Because purple urchins are expensive to process, a market for them has not developed. Without predators to keep them under control, purple urchin populations can explode and travel across the forest floor in vast swarms. Like locusts, they strip all vegetation from areas in their path. Time-lapse photography shows how purple urchins attack the holdfast of giant kelp, severing fronds at their base. The fronds simply float to the surface and drift away. After a feeding front passes, urchin densities decline, but enough urchins remain to prevent kelp regrowth. Areas that are completely devoid of kelp due to urchin grazing are called barrens. Starving sea urchins in the barrens will sometimes venture out onto the sand in search of food. This search can be perilous for the weakened urchins. Time-lapse photography shows a red urchin being attacked and devoured by bat stars and small white sea urchins that typically inhabit sandy areas. Scientists continue to learn more about forests of giant kelp through monitoring programs and research projects. Since the 1960s, scientists have put forth considerable effort to preserve forests of giant kelp. Kelco marine biologists have worked diligently to restore kelp forests impacted by severe storms or by unwise practices of waste disposal. Kelco also has a program to re-establish kelp in areas decimated by grazing purple sea urchins. Airlift dredges are used in areas where purple urchin densities exceed 200 per square meter. The urchins are simply raked towards the dredge, which picks them up and deposits them in a bag for removal. Reducing the urchin density helps preserve adult plants and allows juvenile plants to repopulate. Kelco is also pioneering new restoration techniques. These include methods to enhance both kelp and red sea urchin resources. Due to lack of food, red urchins in barren areas have poor quality roe and are not fit for commercial harvesting. These poor quality urchins can be translocated to temporary holding pens installed throughout the barrens. The penned urchins are then fed regularly. Surface kelp is chopped, pumped through a hose, and delivered directly to the urchins. Feeding the urchins significantly improves their health and roe quality. Once they meet harvesting standards, they can be gathered by urchin divers. Reducing the number of urchins in the barrens allows kelp to develop. Management work such as this is important in maintaining healthy kelp and sea urchin resources. Charles Darwin was among the first to recognize the importance of kelp forests. During the voyage of the Beagle, Darwin noted,
"The number of living creatures whose existence intimately depends on the kelp is wonderful. I do not believe nearly so many species would perish as would here from the destruction of the kelp."
California's kelp forests are a valuable resource and an important wildlife habitat. Programs to protect these unique undersea forests will help secure this environment for the countless wild creatures that live there and result in a wilderness legacy for future generations to enjoy.